This is City Manager Bill Osborne, and welcome to this edition of On the Agenda. Tuesday, November 3 is an important day because that's municipal election day for all cities in the state of Georgia, including Douglasville. And today I'll be talking with our city clerk about the election and also some matters directly impacting voters that I'm sure our viewers are interested in. Also, I'll be talking with Jamie Gilbert, the Executive Director of our City Development Authority, concerning an issue that will be on the ballot on November 3. But let me start. Joyce Stone, our City Clerk, welcome back for another appearance here on the Edition, on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne.
Well, last November, of course, we had some big crowds at the polling places because it was a presidential race, congressional race, state offices, county government offices, a number of state issues, a countywide referendum, big turnout, and of course for city voters there was an extra ballot that they could actually cast a vote in, and that was a city referendum on tax allocation districts. But the problem was that a lot of these people had to go to two different polling places if they wanted to vote. And even if it was at the same polling place, such as mine at Arbor Station Elementary School, you had to get in two different lines to vote.
That's right.
And so for those city voters who persevered and did vote in the referendum last fall, in the city election held on the same day as the general election, I want to thank you. For those of you who, because of frustration or just being too tired, too busy, or for whatever reason, you didn't go and vote in the city election, we understand that, and we have been working since then to look at some ways to remedy that situation. And I'm going to talk with Ms. Stone about that in some detail in just a couple of minutes. But Ms. Stone, just kind of give us kind of an, in general, what we had insofar as number of eligible voters in Douglasville that could vote at the same place, and how many actually would have to go to two different places to vote?
We had a total of 16,059 registered voters in the city, and those that went to two different polling places numbered 9,802.
Which means that's a tremendous number of city voters, tremendous percentage that had to go to two different polling places to vote. Now, shortly after last fall's election, Mayor Thompson, members of the City Council, the two of us, we began working on what could we do to eliminate this problem, or at least to minimize it as much as possible. Some people said to us, well, you know, it'd probably be a long time before the city election and the county election would be on the same day. And we do, of course, have a municipal election on Tuesday, November the 3rd. And lo and behold, the County Board of Commissioners scheduled a countywide referendum and a splosh vote on that same date. So we've got that same problem coming up in this November that we had last November, except we've done some things to try to deal with that. In a few minutes, we'll talk about the different polling places and what we've done and are doing on trying to get Federal Department of Justice approval, because we just can't go out and decide on all of this ourselves. But just kind of give us a brief rundown at this point.
The Mayor and Council established the boundaries, and they submit that to the Department of Justice for approval. We publish the changes in the newspaper as required, but we've also posted these on our website if anybody wants to go there and look at them.
Right.
We then establish polling places in each precinct by, first we request the Board of Registrars to investigate. They report back to the city with their recommendations and a map, and then the city publishes those changes to give the voters an opportunity to object if anyone wishes to. Mm-hmm. There are certain requirements in Georgia law that we have to follow about how the boundaries are drawn, such as following major roadways. There's also state law regarding selection of polling places, such as accessibility, handicapped accessibility, and a lot of other state requirements.
Right. And of course, with all that in mind, the two of us working with our city attorneys worked on a plan. We presented this to the mayor and council because this plan basically would have eliminated the duplication of polling places for city and county voters. That is, if you live in the city, you'd go to one polling place and not have to be like 61% of our registered voters were last year, of having to go to two different polling places. And we came up with a plan. And frankly, we knew that there were probably some parts of our plan that the county government would not accept, but we thought that this was a good approach to start with. We worked on this closely with County Election Supervisor Laura Fulton. And so on April the 30th, the Mayor and City Council adopted a resolution, sent it over to the Douglas County Board of Commissioners and to the Douglas County Board of Elections and Voter Registration. The County Commission appropriately turned that over to the County Board of Elections and Voter Registration, and they approved some of our changes and rejected others. And before we talk about those changes, let me just say we do appreciate those changes that were approved by the Douglas County Board of Elections and Voter Registration, and appreciate the work especially by the County Election Supervisor Laura Fulton and by Board Member Rochelle Robinson. And the board pointed out that while there had been 61% of city voters that had to go to two polling places in the past, under the changes that have been approved, we've cut that down so that there are only 19% of the city voters that would have to go to more than one polling place. And the county board, in agreeing with the recommendations that we made that they approved, did point out that by increasing the number of city polling places from 3 to 7, that this would, when they did this, this would be, quote, eliminating confusion for the vast majority of city voters, close quote. And in the resolution from the City Council on June 15th, the council did say it was pleased with what the board had approved, but we were disappointed with what they didn't approve because, quote, we see no reason for 19% of the city of Douglasville's current voters to be subjected to a different set of rules and be forced to go to two different polling places, close quote. But here we are today, and there was not enough time between now and the November 2009 election to do anything else. Our attention now is on what Ms. Stone said on getting Federal Justice Department approval, and so what our voters will see that for the most part the city and county polling precincts now will be at the same place. And this will really help, and what I want to do at this time, Joyce, is kind of turn the program over to you to do a couple of things. Tell people how they're going to be notified about where they will need to go in November to vote. And second, let's just take the city wards polling places and identify them to us, and we're going to show some maps on the screen while you're doing that. So I'll turn it over to you.
The basic way that the voters will be notified will be precinct cards that will be mailed. We also have the information on our website, and City TV will be running some of that. I'm going to try to identify the city precincts by where folks vote. Okay. They all have a number, but most of us don't. I don't know what my number is. Okay, the voters who live in the city and live in the county precinct where they currently vote at Golden Methodist Church will also vote there for city elections. Those who vote in county elections at the old courthouse will also vote there for city elections. Those who vote at Stewart Middle School for county will now vote there for city also. And the next one would be Arbor Station. Those who vote in county elections at Arbor Station will also vote there for city elections. Those at the Lutheran Church They will also vote there in city elections. Those who live within the county precinct where they vote at First Baptist will now vote there for city elections. And the final one will be those who vote at Factory Shoals Elementary School. That will be changing to Factory Shoals Middle School with this election, and those people will also vote there in county elections. Now, the ones who did not change will be those who vote in county elections at Winston Elementary, and those who vote in county elections at Bright Star Church will continue to vote at the old courthouse in city elections. The voters living in county, who live within the bounds of the county precincts where they vote at Colonial Hills, Turner Middle School, and Lithia Springs High School will now continue to vote at the old courthouse. So that's another set of people who will need to go to a separate place to vote. Voters living and voting at Chestnut Log Middle School and Chapel Hill Middle School in county elections, they will continue to vote at Arbor Station in city elections. Now, I would like to note that the voters who vote at Colonial Hills, Turner Middle School, and Lithia Springs High School in the east end of the county, we have tried to move those people to be able to vote down at Factory Shoals Middle School. But the county rejected that idea at this time.
And that, of course, that you've been talking about, where you still would have two places to go, constitute the 19%, as well as the people in Tributary who live on the south side of Riverside Parkway.
Right.
The north side of Riverside Parkway go to the Factory Shoals Middle School for both election, as you were describing.
And
Joyce.
then in that case, we know that people would still have to go to two polling places, but if they were allowed, those on the east end, to go to the middle school, even though they had two places to go, they would be closer.
Right. And we're not giving up on trying to get all this worked out, and we'll be picking this up again in 2010 on trying to work with the county on this, but this is what we've been able to accomplish for the 2009 coming up, the election coming up November 3rd. Of course, it is possible to vote before Election Day, and before we close this part of today's program, Joyce, how about telling us about that?
Well, I would like to suggest one-stop shopping for our voters. They can go to the county courthouse during the 3 weeks prior to the election and get absentee ballots for both the city and county elections and vote then and there, not have to go to the polls on election day, not have to stand in long lines. Or they can request these ballots by mail. And if you're not registered to vote, the deadline is October 5th, so you can still register. Additional information can be found on our website or by calling me at City Hall.
Okay. Thank you. This is our City Clerk, Joyce Stone, and I'm going to let her give you the phone number to call. And also want to thank her for being with me today.
Thank you.
On the agenda. And don't forget the election date, Tuesday, November 3, and also give us the date one more time with the last date you can register to vote if you're not already registered.
That's October 5th, the deadline to register to vote in the November election. And the phone number at City Hall is 770-920-3000. Okay, that's great. Joyce, thank you for being with me, and to our viewers, please stay tuned for the second part of this episode of On the Agenda.
Hello, I'm Mayor Thompson, and my city TV is serving the people of Douglasville and of Douglas County.
Before I introduce my second guest today, I want to talk for a minute about the two elections on November 3. First, for the city of Douglasville. We have a 7-member city council, and a majority of those seats, namely 4 seats, will be on the ballot of the November 3 election. As we show you a map of each of those wards, let me identify them for you. First, Ward 1, where the incumbent is Charles Banks. Basically, this is the west side of the city. Ward 2, where the incumbent is Dennis McLean. Basically, this is the east side of the city. It includes tributary and the other parts of the city that are east from Fairburn Road to the Cobb County line. Ward 3 is most of the north side and certain areas south of the railroad tracks, including part of the downtown area and the residential area to the east of downtown. And this is wards, we call it a super ward. There are actually 2 seats in this ward. There's a post 1 and a post 2. Post 1 currently seat is held by LaShawn Burr Danley, and post 2 is currently held by Callie Burke Holmes. Now, we will have a citywide referendum on November 3rd on tax allocation districts. So if you live in Ward 4, Ward 5, where you don't have council seats up, you still have this referendum, and we hope that you would go to the polls and cast your vote on this matter. And I'll talk about that and also the county situation with their voting at this time. Under state law, 4-year terms are set for city elected officials, so the mayor and the council members from Ward 4 and Ward 5 will not be on the ballot until November 2011. And the Douglas County government is having a county-wide vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. SPLOSH, Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax referendum to see if voters will approve a SPLOSH to fund a new jail. Now, last November, we know there was a lot of confusion and because we had so many issues on the ballot, so many people running, and for the city and the county, the tax allocation referendum somewhat got lost in the shuffle and a lot of confusion, including the fact that there was a statewide vote dealing with TADS, which was approved. Locally, the city vote was defeated by a relatively narrow margin, the county vote by a slightly greater margin. But we will be looking at those on the referendum side on the ballot again in November. And my second guest today is Jamie Gilbert, who's the new Executive Director of the City Development Authority, and which is frequently referred to as the CDA. So, Jamie, welcome to your first edition of On the Agenda.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here today.
Well, I'm going to have you back on another program to talk in more detail about the City Development Authority and your own background. But today, in the interest of time, we're going to be focusing on tax allocation districts. I know that you have been in economic development for a long time. And just tell me from your experience working in South Carolina, Maryland, elsewhere as to what we in Georgia call tax allocation districts.
Absolutely. Tax allocation districts are a very valuable economic development tool. In some communities in other states, similar programs are referred to as tax increment financing, or in South Carolina, the use of special source revenue bonds that would allow projects to move forward using the tax revenue they generate. What I see here in Douglasville is that the TADS can be used to really move economic development forward in the city. One of the things that has become very apparent to us is the lack of available and ready-to-go business development sites or industrial parks. The Development Authority sees TADS as a mechanism to get those sites ready to catch us up with our competition. And our competition is not just other communities here in Metro Atlanta or across the state of Georgia. It's communities across the Southeast, the United States, and the world. What I see is the ability to utilize the additional tax revenues that are generated from these projects to invest in infrastructure, to get them ready to go, either now or in the future as the property is developed. And what I mean by the infrastructure developments are the ability to put water and sewer and roads into these sites. It's an enormous incentive that we have at our disposal. And what I would like to see is the voters really understand and take hold of the importance of what this means to Douglasville. This is not any additional taxes put on the taxpayers. It is only for those property owners that want to see infrastructure improvements made to their property. And it's only the new revenues that are generated from the project that are available in terms of paying off bonds and other sources that we use to fund the infrastructure improvements.
Right. And you make some great points. And, you know, one of those is when people hear the word tax, they almost naturally cringe and think that government is getting ready to put a heavier load on their shoulders. And as you say, the tax allocation district is a different animal because these taxes apply only to a very small geographic area, and the taxes are levied only in that small geographic area, and it happens only if the property owners willingly say, we want to create a tax allocation district to do just as you say. It's somewhat like using tomorrow's tax dollars to build today's infrastructure that will enhance economic development. And of course, in these difficult times, it's certainly something that we need. But as you said, you can't be in a TAD unless you opt in. But you know, the one question that some of our voters still might have, gosh, if I vote for the TAD referendum, does that mean I'm voting to put myself in a TAD district? And of course, the answer is a very loud no. Georgia law, and I'm not sure what you've experienced in other states, but Georgia law basically says that local governments cannot even consider establishing tax allocation district TADs unless a referendum has been held and the voters approve there being the ability of the local government, in this case the mayor and city council, to establish tax allocation districts. But then if you are able to establish tax allocation districts, assuming the voters have approved this, as you've said and I've said, it's just in those small areas where the property owners themselves have done this, basically to create the infrastructure so that new buildings can be built, new jobs established, which is great from an economic development standpoint. So I know that last year when we were having our election here, you were busy doing economic development in South Carolina. And what happened with the city is we had a relatively small number of people who voted in the TAD referendum because I think of the general election kind of overwhelmed things and some confusion at polling places that we hope we are correcting through the changes that I talked earlier in the program with our city clerk Joyce Stone about. But we're delighted that Representative Roger Bruce, along with Representative Bill Hembrick, Senator Bill Hambrick, and all members of our local delegation took the initiative to look at what took place last year. They shared our view that we didn't get a clear, public didn't have a clear view of what tax allocation districts were, too many other things going on. And so they made it possible through local legislation for us to be able to go back to the polls this November and to do this. So, you know, as somebody who's been in economic development for more than 15 years, tell us what you have seen in other places where they've been able to have this kind of resource as contrasted with those who haven't been able to have the resource.
Sure. What in the site selection business, in which companies and consultants try to identify locations for their clients, whether they be industrial projects, office projects, retail projects, they're looking for sites that can minimize the amount of time it takes to get that facility open for their client. And there's a term that's used called shovel ready. And I don't want that term to be confused. I know some folks have heard lately the term shovel ready associated with stimulus money. This term has been around a lot longer than the stimulus money has. And what it means by shovel ready is that site has been permitted, it has the necessary infrastructure in place so that when a decision is made by a company to go to a particular location, the construction time is greatly reduced because the
Right.
amenities, the infrastructure is there. What I've seen in other communities, Bill, in South Carolina and in Maryland, is that those sites that have the infrastructure in place have a tremendous advantage over those that are considered raw. And right now, if you look at what we have available in Douglasville, we have some tremendously attractive locations that if they just had the infrastructure, and in many cases that's the roads, and in the case of our Bright Star Road Connector site, it's water and sewer. If those sites had those amenities in place, they would be well ahead of the game in terms of being able to attract uses. I think that if you look at, take two examples. If you look at the Bright Star Road Connector site, which is designated as a prime location for higher end retail, we know that Douglasville, if you look around at the mall and you look at what's happened down Chapel Hill Road with Target, we are very successful in supporting retail. The question is, can we support higher end retail? And that has been the question the last few years. Well, if you can minimize the risk for those retailers, and minimizing the risk means reducing the costs, and if you can provide those incentives to make the site ready to go, the infrastructure's there, the development costs are now less, that means that a retailer can come in, and because his costs are less at that site, the risk is now reduced. So that's an advantage that I see, and I've seen that work in other places. For instance, many folks may not know that in Atlanta, Atlantic Station, which is very successful on the retail and the office development
Right.
side, was done with TAD money.
Right.
That's just an example locally of what can be done using tax allocation districts.
Right, and of course, we've got, as you're saying, the retail, and we previously talked about looking at development of office, industrial, major employment opportunities is what we're talking about. And you know, and if the voters decide in November that we can establish tax allocation districts, what this would do, there are firm sets of policies, procedures that you have to put in place to do this. After that's done, when you have the property owners concentrated in a geographic area that wish to do this, the city is able to issue bonds, and of course the bonds are retired because that property, when it's out there with nothing on it, the property taxes are very low. When improvements are placed on that property, the property taxes go up. The payments to pay for these bonds are paid for by the improvements that are made on that property. And the other part, of course, is that there is no decrease in the amount of revenue from what's currently coming to the local government in property taxes. That still would come. It's only the enhanced value of the property bringing in additional tax revenues. Those additional tax revenues pay for the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that's very important because what you're saying is that with the TAD, we are not taking any money directly out of the existing revenue stream.
Right.
That applies to the school, and it applies to the city, and it applies to the county. The monies are only, the tax money that's being allocated for the improvements only comes from the new money that's generated from the project. Very key difference.
Right. And thank you for being with me today. We'll
Thank
be
you.
back again soon to talk about the City Development Authority, but to those of you who've joined us, please mark Tuesday, November the 3rd. Go to the polls with having you decide to vote on any of the issues that will be on the ballot. And thank you for joining us today on The Agenda.